all the way at the end. In the future, just let's fill all the way in at the end. All right. Good morning. Under the rules, the attorneys for both sides are permitted to make their opening statements, which shall consist of a brief statement of the nature of the case that the party expects to prove and the relief sought. Because of the unusual status of this case, I'm going to read a statement similar to the one I read to you yesterday morning. This is information from the court. Plaintiffs Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis, the parents of one of the children murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School, have sued Alex Jones and Free Speech Systems, LLC for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress caused by public statements made by Alex Jones and Free Speech Systems, LLC. You are not here to determine if Mr. Jones and Free Speech Systems, LLC defamed or intentionally inflicted emotional distress on Mr. Heslin or Mr. Lewis. The court has already found that they have committed these acts. The jury's job will be to determine what sum of money, if any, would fairly and reasonably compensate Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis for the damages they incurred that were proximately caused by Mr. Jones and Free Speech Systems, LLC's conduct, as well as what sum of money, if any, should be assessed against Mr. Jones and Free Speech Systems, LLC as punishment for their conduct. Ordinarily, at this stage of the case, the jury would hear all of the evidence on damages. In this case, some of the evidence will be presented after you decide compensatory damages and will be followed by a second charge of the court, just so you understand what's going on. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, we always begin with the plaintiff. So, Mr. Bankston, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Bankston, and I'm here to talk to you about two rules first. Well, we would if we were clicking, wouldn't we?
Uh-oh, sorry.
Let's see if we can get that going. Not a problem, Your Honor. Okay, good, thank you. Like I said, Mark Bankston. I first want to talk to you about two rules. This is the first rule. You can't recklessly tell lies about someone. You can't do it. If you do it, and you cause someone damage, you're responsible. This is the second rule. You can't recklessly tell lies about something important to someone. In this case, like the death of their child. If you do that, you know you're going to cause them harm. You're responsible for that. You're here because those rules are broken. And they were broken in a way in which the world has never seen before. But before we get into that story, you're going to need to understand two things. Who is Alex Jones? What is Infowars? This is Alex Jones and Infowars. Alex Jones is one of the country's most popular and most influential media personalities. Infowars is one of the nation's most popular and widely watched media networks. Now, some of you may be forgiven for not knowing about Mr. Jones or the fact that Infowars is one of our widely watched news networks. And the reason is because we now live in a world of bubbles. We now live in a world where we all watch different things. We don't all just turn on the news on one of the three major networks and watch it back in like the 1950s. We now live in a world where significant parts of this country get their information from things that other parts of the country would never even see. And over the last decade, Mr. Jones has become incredibly influential over a segment of this country. And the thing about Mr. Jones' business is it doesn't quite operate like most media businesses do. Right? Most media businesses are a bit different than Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones started on radio. Right? That's where he became a big star. But Mr. Jones is one of the first people in this country, of media people, to understand the internet and what it could do. And long before most major media organizations even made their first steps into the internet, in the very early days of the 2000s, Mr. Jones was on the internet. And as a result, he has these radio shows, a live broadcast nearly every day, He has an internet website, Infowars.com, where you can view videos, news articles. And he has a YouTube site, or at least he did until very recently, where he got billions of views on that page. The other thing that's different about Mr. Jones's business is that most media businesses make their money through advertising. And you're going to hear from the evidence in this case that Mr. Jones makes a little money that way. That's how they operate. But the main way that this business operates affects the news they cover. Because what they really do, the primary way the business operates is to sell products. As you see here on the screen in Exhibit 15. This is another example that you'll see in the sidebar of the articles you'll see in this case. Here's a product called DNA Force. It claims it's going to overhaul your body's cellular engines and protect them from reactive oxygen species. Now, these kinds of products dictate the kind of news that has to be told on Infowars, because you want to try to attract the audience that will buy these products. So that's what Mr. Jones did. His programming is very fantastical in some respects. In some respects, it's meant to convince you that powerful, shadowy forces in the world are out to get all of us and have put a cloak over reality. And Mr. Jones is going to take that cloak off and show you the real truth. That's what his media network's about. And for the past 10 years or so, Mr. Jones has become very influential. He has gained a position in media maybe unlike any other media figure in this country. And when he did that, 10 years ago, in 2012, when his popularity was truly exploding, Mr. Jones made a choice. And he made that choice. God, there we go. Made that choice on December 14th, 2012. That was the day of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Really one of the darkest days in American history. When you got to think back to 2012 when this happened. We'd never seen anything like this before. I mean, the idea of someone coming in and slaughtering first graders, we were all of us, in like a collective state of shock over this. But not Mr. Jones. You see, Mr. Jones made a choice that day. Mr. Jones decided he was going to go on the air that day with the title of a video. And that video was called Connecticut School Massacre. Looks like false flag, says witnesses. Now, what's a false flag? It's interesting, it's an older term. It's a naval term from 17th, 16th century. And what it means is, let's say you were a Spanish ship and you wanted to attack a French ship, but you didn't want to get Spain in trouble. Well, what you could do is you could put up a British flag on your ship. You could fly a false flag. That's what that meant, so that you could attack the French ship without getting Spain in trouble. That's where the term comes from. But in the modern sense, in Mr. Jones's world, false flag now means something very different. A false flag is when a mass tragedy, shooting, or bombing was actually staged by the United States government, and particularly the Central Intelligence Agency, and that is fake. Didn't happen. I want to show you Mr. Jones on the day of Sandy Hook, as news was coming in of Sandy Hook. On his broadcast, he called Connecticut School Massacre looks like false flag, says witnesses. And you'll see that Mr. Jones is talking to somebody who has a relative in Newtown, and he's trying to coax out the information to prove that this was a false flag. Let's take a look at that clip.
I said, this is the attack. Look, people got to find the clips the last 2 months. I said they are launching attacks. They're getting ready. I can see them warming up with Obama. They've got a bigger majority in the Congress now, in the Senate. They are going to come after our guns, look for mass shootings. And then magically it happens. They are coming. They are coming. They are coming.
As you'll come to see, when Mr. Jones says magically it happened, that's sarcasm. Mr. Jones means that it was planned, that it was all staged. That's what he's talking about. And over the next couple of weeks, you will see in this case of the broadcast in 2012, that December, Mr. Jones continually was churning this idea that Sandy Hook was fake. By just 1 month after the shooting, Alex Jones, who would become patient zero for the Sandy Hook hoax, he had created a sensation. And by a month later, he had aired an entire episode entitled, "Why People Think Sandy Hook is a Hoax." And for some of you, I think, and it hit me right at the beginning, is why? Why is he doing this? It's guns. It's about guns. Mr. Jones knew that his audience were worried about their guns. Maybe even rightly, they were worried about, people who wanted to own AR-15s. Maybe there were going to be some new registration checks, or maybe they were going to ban the AR-15s. Right? That's people that had that worry. But Mr. Jones played on that fear. He knew it. He knew they felt that. And so here's what he did. Jones told his audience that Obama was coming for their guns. So he told his audience that Obama staged Sandy Hook. And not that Obama ordered the murder of those children, but that there were never any children at all. That the school was fake. That it wasn't an operating school. That the parents were liars. Paid actors.
Your Honor?
No.
Well, Your Honor, it's ordered that all demonstrative exhibits be shared with the other side before, and this PowerPoint was not. So...
These are words that he's saying, overruled.
Okay.
And yeah, I've shared all the images in this stuff. Let's go back. Mr. Jones said that the school was fake. And it wasn't an operating school. He said that the parents were liars, paid actors. He said the funerals were fake. Their tears were fake. Everything was fake. So that Mr. Jones could have this story on his broadcast. This was a massive campaign of lies. That's what the evidence is going to show you. And in fact, it is difficult to wrap your head around it. We have brought for you, we're going to be showing you in this trial, dozens of videos. 44, I believe. We're going to try to show you before it's all over. And we can't show you all of them, and I'm going to tell you why. If we were to sit down and try to watch all the videos that we have about Sandy Hook, if I just put them on and let's play them and let you watch them, and we're going to spend the rest of this week doing it, we couldn't do it. Would not have enough time for you to sit here every single day and watch it. So I'm going to have to show you what I can. I'm going to respect your time in that. And we're going to be showing you clips from over years and years and years, and we're going to try to give you the full breadth of what happened. And the other problem we face is we don't even have all the videos. We know there's more out there. You're going to hear testimony about that. You're going to hear expert witnesses talk about it. We don't have it all. We can only show you what we do have. Right? That no one really even knows how massive this was. Because some of that is lost to the sands of time. But this was done. This massive campaign of lies was accomplished because Mr. Jones recruited wild extremists from the fringes of the internet who were willing to be as cruel as Mr. Jones needed them to be. The first one of these is a man named Wolfgang Halbert. You're going to hear a lot about this man during this trial. Wolfgang Halbert, you will hear, was a former Florida state trooper. And then apparently he started some sort of security business. And Mr. Halbert was on Infowars all the time. They just had him on over and over and over. Because Mr. Jones needed somebody who could pretend like they were going to support what he was saying. And Mr. Halbert was willing to do that for attention. I want to show you of the many, many times that Mr. Halbert was on. Let's first watch this first clip from September 25th, 2014, in an episode entitled, "Connecticut PD has FBI falsify crime statistics." All right, and what you're going to see in this video is Mr. Jones describing Mr. Halbert, and then I want you to pay attention because you're going to see something very strange. You're going to see Mr. Jones do mocking imitations of the parents crying to try to say that they're fake. You're going to see Mr. Jones say that there are photos of their children that prove that they're still alive, that they faked their deaths. Just take a look at what Mr. Jones said there.
We're fearless, folks. Support us. Support Wolfgang. This is not a game. They are hopping mad. We're covering this. CNN admits they did fake scud attacks on themselves back in 1991, 1990. Would they stage this? I don't know. Do penguins live in Antarctica? Wolfgang W. Halbert's our guest, former state police officer, then worked for the Customs Department, and then over the last decades created one of the biggest, most successful school safety training groups, and he just has gone and investigated, and it's as funny as a $3 bill, and they've been... But man, Wolfgang, you dropped a bombshell of your scores of points, your 16 questions. If you've got a school of 100 kids, and then nobody can find them, and then you've got parents laughing on, and then they walk over to the camera and go, and not just one, but a bunch of parents doing this, and then photos of kids that are still alive, they said died. I mean, they think we're so dumb that it's really hidden in plain view. And so the preponderance, I mean, I thought they had some scripting early on to exacerbate and milk the crisis, as Rahm Emanuel said. But when you really look at it, where are the lawsuits? There would be incredible lawsuits and payouts, but there haven't been any filed, nothing. I've never seen this. This is incredible.
That's Mr. Halbert you're seeing on the screen right there. Mr. Halbert will come on the show and they'll do interviews, and we'll see some from Mr. Halbert too. We're going to see some videos of him talking. But that's the guy that he would be bringing on these shows to talk about this over and over and over and over again. The following day, they published this article on Infowars.com. This article reads, FBI says no one killed at Sandy. Now, let's just make this clear. Everyone now agrees. You're going to hear testimony from the author of this article. This is obviously wrong. You're going to hear, he didn't read the chart right. He just didn't scroll down. And they went with this and put it out to their audience. And the important thing about this is this story was Infowars' third most popular story ever. This was a viral sensation. Millions and millions of people saw this article. You're going to see the data on that. And when Mr. Jones realized the explosive popularity of these kinds of things, he doubled down. You gotta remember, we're 2 years out from Sandy Hook. No network is covering Sandy Hook anymore. Mr. Jones, though, saw how this was doing with his audience. It became an obsession at Infowars. You're gonna see that there are parts of Mr. Jones' show. You know, he has his live show, and he has these internet videos he puts up, and he also has, he does a radio show. So he has call-in guests sometimes, or call-in listeners, who will call in and talk about things with Mr. Jones. And they were eating the Sandy Hook stuff up with a spoon, and Mr. Jones kept inflaming it. Here's an example from December 29th, 2014. This was called America, the False Democracy. In this clip, you are going to hear Mr. Jones say that these children did not die. Sandy Hook is 100% fake.
Let's talk to Kevin. Kevin, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi, Alex. Calling about Sandy Hook. Basically, my take on it is I live about 50 miles from Newtown, and the whole thing is pretty much the next step in reality TV, because with other false flags like 9/11 or Oklahoma City or the Boston bombing, at least something happened. With Sandy Hook, there's no there. You've got a bunch of people walking around a parking lot, pretty much what it comes down to, and none of the evidence...
No, I've had the investigators on, I've had the state police have gone public, you name it. The whole thing is a giant hoax. And the problem is, how do you deal with a total hoax? I mean, how do you even convince the public something's a total hoax?
Very hard, because, anytime I talk about this issue with people, you get criticized, blackballed, ridiculed, called every name in the book, or they respond with the magic words. They were saying on TV, there's no statement more proof positive of somebody who's been brainwashed by that stuff, mainstream media, than those words. They were saying on TV. Well, I always tell people the same thing. Go out and prove the official story. And I knew the millisecond this happened with that now fake picture of the kids being let out of the school, that there's nothing that's going to sell this agenda like dead elementary school kids. It's not.
That's right. The general public doesn't know the school was actually closed the year before. They don't know they've shielded all, demolished the building. They don't know that they had the kids going in circles in and out of the building as a photo op. Blue screen, green screens they got caught using. I mean, the whole thing. But remember, this is the same White House that's been caught running the fake bin Laden raid that's come out and been faked. It's the same White House that got caught running all these other fake events over and over again. And it's the same White House that says, I never said that you can keep your doctor, when he did say you can keep your doctor. People just instinctively know that there's a lot of fraud going on. But it took me about a year with Sandy Hook to come to grips with the fact that the whole thing was fake. I mean, even I couldn't believe it. I knew they jumped on it, used the crisis, hyped it up, but then I did deep research, and my gosh, it just pretty much didn't happen.
This kept up into 2015. The next part of our story. You'll see here another one of these call-in segments in an episode on January 13th, 2015. It was called Why We Accept Government Lies. Same kind of format here, except now Mr. Jones is starting to add new stuff. One of the things you'll hear in this video is that now Mr. Jones is saying that there were photos of a child at Sandy Hook that were used to stage a fake mass shooting in Pakistan. All right? It's confusing, but we'll get into it. I want you to take a look at this video from January 13th, 2015.
Yeah, when you're trying to, decipher cloak and dagger, dirty tricks, it's pretty hard to do. It's just that when you learn that they were funded by Western funding, then you learn that it was the same Amarillo Lockheed Connection underwear bomber. Then those are big red flags that they were patsy provocateurs. The classic MO has been followed. And then, yeah, it kind of becomes a red herring, to say the whole thing was staged. Because they have staged events before. But then you learn the school had been closed and reopened, and you got video of the kids going in circles in and out of the building, and they don't call the rescue choppers for 2 hours, and then they tear the building down and seal it, and they get caught using blue screens, and a email by Bloomberg comes out in a lawsuit where he's telling his people, get ready in the next 24 hours to capitalize on a shooting. So Sandy Hook is a synthetic, completely fake, with actors, in my view, manufactured. I couldn't believe it at first. I knew they had actors there, clearly, but I thought they killed some real kids. And it just shows how bold they are, that they clearly used actors. I mean, they even ended up using photos of kids killed in mass shootings here in a fake mass shooting in Turkey. So, yeah, or Pakistan. The sky is now the limit. I appreciate your call.
Shortly after this, Infowars got its first YouTube strike. This means somebody made a complaint against the channel. In this case, it was a father of a victim. There was a father who had complained to Infowars because their son's photo was used in one of their videos. It was this whole thing about the Pakistan shooting, and we'll get into that. It's not important now. It's obviously a lie. But when they used the son's picture, they complained to YouTube for copyright reasons. That's how they figured they could stop him. So YouTube issued him a strike. But Infowars smartened up after this, and they realized don't use pictures of the children. That's what you're going to see. So from this point forward, you'll see Mr. Jones react about this and say, this is, unjust to me, and I'm going to keep doing it. And it did. It kept up. Mr. Jones had Mr. Halbert all through 2015. And you'll see on March 4th, 2015, in this video, it's a new bombshell Sandy Hook information intel. Now, before we look at this video, I want to talk about, you've heard some of them already. Mr. Jones is going to keep repeating these same false claims. He's not questioning anything. You got to make sure there's a big difference here. He's not questioning. He's not going, something fishy might be going on at Sandy Hook. These aren't questions. He's just stating facts falsely. And here they are. You'll hear about Anderson Cooper on a blue screen. And you might know about blue screen from like Marvel movies. This is how they composite somebody into something. The argument here is that Anderson Cooper of CNN did an interview with a parent in Newtown, and they weren't really in Newtown. They were really on a CNN studio in Atlanta, and they faked it and made it look like Anderson Cooper was there with the parent. But these people weren't even at Sandy Hook. It's a lie. You're going to see it's a lie. It's just an obvious lie. You're going to hear them talking about kids walking in circles, going around the building, doing drills. And you're going to see the video he's talking about in his videos. He's going to play it. And what's most astonishing is the video he's showing, the building in the video, isn't even the Sandy Hook school. He just lied to his viewers. It's a firehouse in Newtown. And you're going to see that this video is hours later in the day when parents are showing up to pick up their kids, find out what happened. And there's a group of adults and teenagers and all walking around the building to get to the front of the building. And Mr. Jones tried to sell this to his audience to say that this was fake. It shows that it was the children were actually being let out of the front of the building and then back into the building. And he'll say, well, you should be getting them away from the building. It's not even Sandy Hook. He's going to talk about men in SWAT gear caught in the woods. But you're going to see video that proves that they actually knew that the video they're talking about, it's helicopter footage, was taken well into the afternoon, hours after the shooting, had nothing to do with the shooting, and you're going to find out it's some reporters who tried to get too close to the school, take pictures. It's all in the police reports, it's all public, but he tried to convince his viewers that these were CIA operatives or whatever, in SWAT gear to facilitate the shooting or something. Whatever false thing he thought was going on here. Let's talk about how the school was actually closed. It was not an operating school. That they just opened it up for this day to stock it full of people and did like a stage production. But it was all not real. And it's these kind of statements that you're going to see in this case. And the internal communications inside Infowars, they knew this was a lie. They're not that. They know there's copious evidence out there if you really go look for it that Sandy Hook was open. They were saying this knowing it was false. You'll hear him talk about a Michael Bloomberg email the day before. Michael Bloomberg is the former mayor of New York City. And part of what he has done since being mayor is he's been a real big gun control advocate. And they want to have their viewers believe that Michael Bloomberg sent an email to his supporters saying, hey, 24 hours from now, we're going to have a mass shooting. Everybody get ready to mobilize on it. As if Michael Bloomberg had foreknowledge that they were going to fake this shooting. You're not going to see this email because obviously it doesn't exist. It's made up. Just a lie. You're going to hear about rescue helicopters. Why weren't the rescue helicopters called? But you're going to find out Mr. Jones doesn't know where the rescue helicopters were coming from. He doesn't know how close the hospital was to Sandy Hook Elementary. And you're going to hear that those EMS, they would have gotten there way faster than a helicopter from way far away. You're going to hear all sorts of things about the ambulances and the EMTs. He tells his audience that they never even allowed EMTs in the building. And I'm guessing here so you don't have to get the EMTs in on the conspiracy, right? You just keep them out of the building, they'll never know it was all fake. It's garbage. EMTs went in that building, anybody can verify it. It's not hard to figure that out. Most of them have given interviews about what they saw that day. It was the worst day of their lives. You're going to hear about that response that day. And yeah, EMTs were in there. He's going to tell you that they sealed the death certificates and that even owning one is a felony. That's on an Infowars episode you're going to see. And the truth is, any one of you could right now call up Newtown Clerk and get one for $20. Any of the victims. It's just a lie. You're going to hear him say, as you've already heard him say, that there are photos of the victims who are still alive. This is so disgusting, so repulsive, that I feel silly standing here and telling you that's false. But that's what I have to do in this case. That's where we're at. I want to show you a video of him saying all these things. This is when Mr. Halbert comes on the show again. And let's listen to what Mr. Jones has to say.
Mr. Halbert, thanks for coming on. Recap who you are. Recap why you question kind of the top 10 or 15 points that I know are on your website of why this doesn't add up. And then now they're really trying to seal everything when they could discredit us anytime they wanted to. Just tell us why Anderson Cooper's nose disappears, why it's blue screen. Just tell us why the people are walking in circles in and out of the building. It appears to be staged. Tell us why they said they didn't catch somebody in the woods when they did. Tell us why the school was closed before and then after, why they've sealed it all, why they've not torn it down. Tell us why Bloomberg sent an email to his people the day before saying, get ready to launch an operation to capitalize on the mass shooting. Tell us why you didn't launch the emergency helicopters. Tell us why the ambulance is parked for an hour down the road. Tell us why this appears to be as phony as a $3 bill. Wolfgang, thank you for joining us.
And you'll notice these aren't questions. Tell us why this happened, because it did happen according to Mr. Jones. It'd be like if somebody came up to you and said, tell me why you're a thief. Tell me why you're a liar. Tell me why you're a murderer. It's not a question. That's not what Mr. Jones was doing. You're going to see that by November 2015, there was more people getting involved in this. As I told you, Mr. Jones was recruiting wild extremists from the fringes of the internet. One of those gentlemen was a man named Jim Fetzer. Jim Fetzer, Infowars helped distribute his book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. Jim Fetzer was a former professor who, in his twilight years, started doing things like this and wanted his stuff featured on Mr. Jones' show. And Infowars wanted to help him. And you're going to see the internal emails in which Infowars helps him distribute this book, this horrific book. The next month, it's important to know that at least a couple of people inside of Infowars knew what was happening was wrong. They knew it. They didn't just know it, they warned him. Editor-at-large Paul Watson, the editor-at-large of the company, warned Mr. Jones in writing. Now, I know that's probably hard for some of y'all to see, so I'm going to read this to you. There's an email you will see. This is from Paul Watson, the editor at Infowars, to Buckley at Infowars, who's another managerial employee, and Anthony at Infowars, who you'll hear is another managerial employee. And he says, sent this to Alex. He says, this Sandy Hook stuff is killing us. It's promoted by the most batshit crazy people, like Rince and Fetzer, who all hate us anyway. Plus, it makes us look really bad to align with people who harass the parents of dead kids. It's going to hurt us with Drudge and bringing bigger names into the show. Plus, the event happened 3 years ago. Why even risk our reputation for it? And when he's talking about Drudge, some of you probably know he's talking about Drudge Report, a website that compiles news links. And if a media organization gets featured on Drudge, it gets a lot of traffic. So Mr. Watson wasn't so much concerned about the morality here. He was concerned it's going to make us look bad, and it's going to hurt us with Drudge. This is about money. This is about the bottom line, what he was trying to get Alex Jones to see. And Mr. Watson had very good reason to be alarmed. Not just because of the things that were being said on Infowars and the things that were being written, but what Mr. Jones was doing on top of it. And one of those things was sending his reporter to Newtown, Connecticut. And what you're going to see is that this reporter, Dan Badandi, who we will find out is a former professional wrestler, he went to Newtown and confronted people in Newtown. I want to show you a video of that. This is going to be Mr. Badandi following around Newtown city officials. And I want you to hear what he says to them.
What's this guy's name again? He's from criminal walking up and down the walkway. And it's trippy crook, piece of shit.
He's covering up the whole operation. They had communication with the helicopter. They're lying on the stand. That's perjury, sir. You know what perjury is? I'm going to jail, criminal.
Truth is out there.
You're going to jail, criminal. Have fun with your retirement. And you, sir, defending criminals, how do you feel about that? You know, this guy here is somebody out of Central Casting, up Playa. This is the exact person that they would hire to represent criminals, folks. The Sandy Hook truth is coming out, you people are going to jail. You can smile all you want, you're going to jail for fraud. Plain and simple.
Oh, you're looking at his credentials, Dan Badandi, Infowars.com, the #1 alternative news source in the world.
Live right on here. What do you have to say about defending criminals? You're a bunch of frauds, a bunch of criminals.
Enjoy your Federal Reserve notes now, scumbags.
See those people, folks? They're covering up Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook was an inside job.
The thing about this is that I think you can tell from this video, Mr. Badandi, that reporter, he probably believes this stuff. Right? He's being, Mr. Jones used him just as much as anybody. This poor guy, not maybe, not the sharpest thinker sometimes, maybe believes this. Mr. Jones doesn't. He was happy to have this happen, and you will see that these videos are featured on Infowars where they bragged about scaring the people of Utah. And it wasn't just editor Paul Watson warning Mr. Jones. The warnings came not only from Infowars employees. Mr. Jones and Infowars was warned by their viewers that what they were doing was wrong. And you're going to hear about people who are online debunkers. People who were so horrified that they felt they wanted to make it their duty to try to debunk and disprove the things that Infowars was saying. And those people also contacted the company and let them know in no uncertain terms the potential legal consequences from where this was headed. That happened. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter that they warned them, told them that what they were doing was wrong, told them that what they were doing was false, because Infowars already knew that. They already knew they were lying. They knew it was false. Here's the thing. You're going to see that you're going to hear testimony from the company that they admit they received a huge volume of emails from Wolfgang Halbert and Jim Fetzer that were crazy. And they knew that. And they admit it. And you're going to hear that they knew that Halbert and Fetzer and others were harassing the parents. And they didn't care. It didn't bother them in the slightest. This kept up into 2016. And one of the things that you might remember about 2016 is the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Jones became a major topic during that election. Some of you may remember, in fact, that Mr. Jones' lies were discussed by Clinton in her campaign speeches. Mr. Jones didn't like this. Mr. Jones fashions himself as a political enemy and rival of Hillary Clinton. And when she said this about him, he was mad, and he decided to respond. So he released a video on November 18, 2016, and it was called his final statement on Sandy Hook. It was not his final statement. It was very, very disturbing. You're going to see a couple things in this video. You're going to see that Mr. Jones, for the first time, directly addresses the complaints of the parents who have been outraged about this. And he's going to say about that is suspicious, that they protest too much, that they must be hiding something. And at the end of this long rant, you're going to hear Mr. Jones look right into this camera, tell the people directly. He will address the people who say they're parents that I see on TV. And what he says to them is, my heart would go out to you. But the problem is, I've seen actors before, and I know when I'm watching a movie, and I know when I'm watching something real. You see Mr. Jones nodding along with that. You hear him
And why should anybody fear an investigation if they have nothing to hide? In fact, isn't that in Shakespeare's Hamlet? Methinks you protest too much. So here is my statement for the media when they call up, saying, where do you stand on this? Where I've always stood. When there were other mass shootings, I would simply point out that they're very rare statistically, and why should we all give up our rights because some other bad person does something? A guy with a car runs over 50 people. Do we ban driving cars? It's the same thing. And there have been other instances of shootings that are very suspicious. Aurora is one. Just look into that. But this particular case, they are so scared of investigation. So everything they do basically ends up blowing up in their face. So you guys are going to get what you want now. I'm going to start reinvestigating Sandy Hook and everything else that happened with it. I'm Alex Jones signing off from Infowars.com. If you're watching this transmission, think for yourself. I know it's a thought crime. And then ask yourself, what is it so strange about Sandy Hook and that tragedy? But I will say this, finally, my heart does go out to all parents that lose children, whether it's to stabbings, or whether it's to car wrecks, or whether it's to stranglings, or whether it's to blunt force trauma or murder, firearms, whatever the case is. I'm a parent, and my heart goes out to all parents that have lost children in these tragic events. And so, if children were lost in Sandy Hook, my heart goes out to each and every one of those parents and the people that say they're parents that I see on the news. The only problem is I've watched a lot of soap operas, and I've seen actors before. And I know when I'm watching a movie, I know when I'm watching something real. Let's look at the Sandy Hook.
This man knew that the parents of murdered children were emotionally distressed, outraged, grieving. And he looked straight into that camera and he said, the only problem is I've watched a lot of soap operas and I've seen actors before. And I know when I'm watching a movie and I know when I'm watching something real. It kept going. It just kept going. It doesn't stop. 2017. And it's still going. They're still making videos saying it's phony as a $3 bill. In fact, one of those from that year that I want to talk to you about was called Sandy Hook Vampires Exposed. And in that video, Mr. Jones says that the media, the Central Intelligence, the parents that say they're parents that he sees on the news, people who are the fake crisis actors, people who are faking the interview of Anderson Cooper, they're all vampires of Sandy Hook. And he says, all the same fake stuff again. The school wasn't even open. It was rotting and falling apart. It didn't even look like a real school. And he asks, why haven't we seen any pictures of bodies? Him and his nightly news director, Mr. Dew, they wanted to see the bodies. And at this point, in 2017, they are at their breaking point. At this point, there had been an ongoing nationwide controversy that was all churned by Jones. There was Jones's public denial of their son's violent death. And they were getting harassment by Mr. Halbert and other followers of Jones. They were at their breaking point. And so Neil made a decision, a very tough decision. He made the decision on June 19th, 2017. He decided he agreed to an interview with Megyn Kelly. I think some of y'all may remember Megyn Kelly used to have an NBC show. It's called Megyn Kelly Tonight. It's a news magazine. And he thought, when Ms. Kelly asked him if he would come on the show, because she was doing a profile about Mr. Jones, he thought, if I go on this show and I say, please stop, I'm a real dad. He thought if Mr. Jones was able to look him in the eyes and see him, that he could solve this. And so he went on Miss Kelly's show in front of a national televised audience and said, look, I'm a real dad. I lost my son. I buried my son. I held my son with a bullet hole through his head. Please stop. And Neil was hopeful. Neil was really hopeful that it would stop. It did not. On June 25th, 2017, Infowars struck back directly at Mr. Heselman. They retaliated. And they did it in a disgusting way. They aired a video that talked about Neil's interview on Megyn Kelly and said, one problem. Mr. Heselman's a liar. Mr. Heselman never held his child. He made up that story. And we can prove it. Because you see, according to Infowars' version of events, the shooting was fake. And all these fake actor parents, who were like paid actors of the CIA, were given a cover story. And one of the easiest parts of their cover story, apparently, was that they didn't release the bodies of the children to the parents. And the idea being, if you don't have to worry about the bodies and all that sort of stuff, it makes it easier to pull off this fakery. So they had all these paid actors say, we never got the children. The bodies were never released to us. But the allegation here is that Mr. Heselman forgot his cover story and said something that wasn't true, that he held his child. They did this by deceptively editing video interviews. The first is of this man. You're going to see this when these videos are played. I'm going to play you this video about Mr. Hesselman. And this man is Dr. Wayne Carver. He is the medical examiner who had the incredibly difficult job of seeing those children after CPR. And what you're going to see, the evidence will show you that Dr. Carver in this interview was talking about the process by which the children were identified. All right? They got all the children, and they got to get the parents into contact, right? And he'll talk about how the way you do that is through photographing. Right? You don't want, the reason you do that is it's less traumatic, and you don't want to bring a parent into the room of a body of a child that's not theirs. Right? So you want to do this by photographing. Make sure that you get them lined up before you do it. And as you'll hear, he'll even say there's a time and a place for up close and personal. But first you identify by photograph. They actually edited this video in such a way to make it look like, oh no, the parents were only shown photographs of their children. Or that was the story anyway. And it's actually just a complete deception, sleight of hand by editing this man's interview. They do the same thing with these parents. This is Lynn and Christine McDonald. And Lynn and Christine McDonald, you'll see in this interview, we're talking about the process of being at the funeral home of their daughter. And her casket. And, you know, as a mom, when your child has suffered these kinds of injuries, you have to make a very difficult decision. And what that decision is whether to open that casket. And Miss McDonald made a decision not to. And you're going to hear, you'll hear expert testimony talking about this interview, where you'll see that Miss McDonald wanted her little daughter, she wanted to remember her just the way she was. So she didn't look. And what Infowars did is they took her interview and they cut her off mid-sentence and made it look like she was never allowed to see her child. Both of these things, all of this stuff you're going to see in this video, came from this anonymous blog post that had information from that gentleman, Jim Fetzer, who Infowars, you'll hear testimony, that they knew, at the time they published this broadcast, they knew Mr. Fetzer was crazy, completely unreliable. They didn't care. They were doing this to retaliate against Neil, who had the temerity, the audacity, to stand up on national television and tell him to stop. That's what this was for. I want you to see that video. Let's play that now.
So folks, now here's another story. You know, I don't even know if Alex knows about this, to be honest with you. Alex, if you're listening and you want to, or if you just want to know what's going on, Zero Hedge has just published a story. Megyn Kelly fails to fact-check Sandy Hook father's contradictory claim in Alex Jones' hit piece. Now again, this broke, I think it broke today, I don't know what time, but featured in Megyn Kelly's expose, Neil Hesselman, a father of one of the victims, during the interview described what happened the day of the shooting, and basically what he said, the statement he made, fact checkers on this have said cannot be accurate. He's claiming that he held his son and saw the bullet hole in his head. That is his claim. Now, according to a timeline of events and a coroner's testimony, that is not possible. And so one must look at Megyn Kelly and say, Megyn, I think it's time for you to explain this contradiction in the narrative. Because this is only going to fuel the conspiracy theory that you're trying to put out, in fact. So, and here's the thing, too. You would remember, let me see how long these clips are. You would remember if you held your dead kid in your hands with a bullet hole. That's not something that you would just misspeak on. So let's roll the clip first, Neil Heslin telling Megyn Kelly of his experience with his kid.
At Sandy Hook Elementary School, one of the darkest chapters in American history was a hoax.
I lost my son. I buried my son. I held my son with a bullet hole through his head.
Neil Heslin's son Jesse, just 6 years old, was murdered, along with 19 of his classmates and 6 adults, on December 14th, 2012, in Newtown, Connecticut.
Yeah, I dropped him off at 9:04. That's when we dropped him off at school with his book bag. Hours later, I was picking him up in a body bag.
Okay, so making a pretty extreme claim that would be a very thing vivid in your memory, holding his dead child. Now, here is an account from the coroner that does not corroborate with that narrative.
We did not bring the bodies and the families into contact. We took pictures of them, of their facial features. You have, it's easier on the families when you do that. There is a time and a place for up close and personal in the grieving process. But to accomplish this, we felt it would be best to do it this way, and you can sort of you can control the situation depending on your photographer, and I have very good photographers.
It's got to be hard not to have been able to actually see her.
Well, at first I thought that, and I had questioned maybe wanting to see her.
Okay, so just another question that people are now going to be asking about Sandy Hook. The conspiracy theorists on the internet out there that have a lot of questions that are yet to get answered. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the event. That's just a fact. So there's another one. Will there be a clarification from Heslin or Megyn Kelly? I wouldn't hold your breath. So now they're fueling the conspiracy theory claims. Unbelievable. We'll be right back with more.
The man you just saw, his name is Owen Schroyer. He's another media star at Infowars, sort of Mr. Jones' protege. And what you just saw there was a manufactured, fabricated lie, specifically engineered and calculated to hurt Neil Heslin and Scarlett Rose, to retaliate against Neil for daring to speak out, proposing any sort of resistance to Mr. Jones' years of cruelty. They struck back against him. And it didn't end there. Right? Now Neil and his family had been introduced into the Sandy Hook conspiracy. They were a key part of it now. They were a focus of this lie. And it didn't end. A month later, you're going to see that there was significant controversy over this video you just saw. And Mr. Jones, a month later, doubled down and defended it. He got on a show, he played that entire video again, and then he said this. He said, that was a month ago. He, meaning Mr. Schroyer, had said, I wouldn't hold my breath looking for a response. We've not seen a clarification. Mr. Jones then said, the stuff I found was they never let them see their bodies. This is Jesse. And the thing that I think is really important to understand about Neil and Scarlett's state of mind when this video came out is, obviously Neil is talking about the last moments he spent with his little boy. And Alex Jones came along and he took that memory, that rather beautiful memory, and he ruined it, and he tarnished it, and he made it ugly. And now every single time that Neil Heslin has to think about the last moments he spent with Jesse, he also has to think about this horrible man. This disgusting series of lies that will be forever tied to his son's death. that Jesse's legacy had now become tied to this. That there would always be an asterisk next to his name. That there would be this contingent of people who would come out of the woodwork and decide they needed to confront Neil and Scarlett about this. And Neil and Scarlett spent the next years, up until the day they're sitting in this courthouse, dealing with this fallout. Of having all of these people think that they're liars, crisis actors, CIA agents, and their son Jesse didn't even live. I want to talk about what this trial means. Because there has never been anything like this. All right? There are lots of defamation cases in the past. It is, in fact, our oldest human law.
Objection to argument, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Defamation is one of the oldest laws we have in human society. Many of you know it in another form, in its earliest form from the dawn of man. We do not bear false witness against our neighbors. We believe that as a people, and we have since the moment we all started sitting down and living in cities together. And in the modern form, we see defamation cases. And that would, sometimes be about a news article, or a book, or a video on TV, or in some cases, maybe a couple of articles, or a series of videos. But never in the human history of defamation has somebody for 10 years, over and over and over, to a global audience, harassed, lied, and attacked the parents of murdered children for 10 years, causing huge portions of this country and indeed the globe to doubt them and their story. It has never happened. Where people are showing up and confronting the parents of murdered children in public, threatening their lives. It's never happened. This trial is different than anything that's ever gone on in this courtroom. And you're not here to decide whether all this happened. I think we all know that now. We're going to see the videos. Nobody doubts that the videos were published. You're going to see the black and white documents. You're going to see the internal emails. But you're not going to have to decide whether all this happened. And you know that you're not here to decide whether Mr. Jones is legally responsible. It's also not something you need to decide. And this also has nothing to do with the Constitution, because defamation is not protected by freedom of speech. Okay? We decided that long ago as a people. It actually recalls some of the words written by our old Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, the former Chief Justice of the United States. And he wrote in Hustler versus Falwell.
Your Honor, same objection to argument.
I'm going to allow it, but make sure you...
It's very brief, Your Honor.
Okay. So overruled.
In Hustler versus Falwell, Justice Rehnquist said this: false statements of fact are particularly valueless. They interfere with the truth-seeking function of the marketplace of ideas, and they cause damage to an individual's reputation that cannot easily be repaired by counterspeech, however persuasive or effective. It's for that reason that we do not protect defamation, false speech. Because speech is free, but lies you have to pay for. There is also no question that Neil and Scarlett suffered harm. I don't know what Infowars lawyers are going to get up here and say. I don't. But one thing I know they will not tell you is that Neil and Scarlett weren't harmed by this. That's not going to happen. They won't tell you that. Because we all know that happened. And the testimony will show that free speech systems admits that its conduct harmed the plaintiffs. They'll admit what they did to these parents' grieving process. They'll admit it. They just don't care. And they do not believe that they should have to pay anything beyond $1 for it. They think that the pain that they admit that they caused has no value. None. They're going to stand up here after the things that you've just seen, admitting that they did wrong, admitting that they caused the harm, and they're going to have the absolute gall to say, give them $1. That's what they're going to do. You have 2 tasks. There's 2 things you got to do while you're in this courtroom. The first task is how much money should Neil and Scarlett be paid for the harm Mr. Jones has caused. The second thing you're going to have to consider is how much money will it take to punish Mr. Jones for his actions. That's it. Those are the only 2 things you're here to do today, or through this trial. And I want to talk really briefly about the burden of proof for doing that, because that came up a little bit during jury selection, and you'll notice they use this term, preponderance of the evidence. And ever since I came out of law school long ago, I do not know why we use words like that. That is dumb. Why do we talk that way? It really, because there's such an easy way to say it, and I think everybody in the courtroom will agree with me, the defense counsel will agree, that what preponderance of the evidence means is a fact more likely true than not true. Just a slight tipping of the scales. If you think you could flip a coin flip and it's better than those odds, that's more likely true than not true. And that's how we decide things in a civil court. Obviously, most of the things, like about whether he did something wrong or whether these videos are published, you won't have to decide that. So this actually isn't going to be that difficult in this case, because the evidence that you're going to see is going to fill up that scale you see that's pushing down. It's going to weigh it way down, because what goes in that part of the scale is the harm to Neil and Scarlett. And the evidence of that is overwhelming. You're going to be hearing a lot about it. You see, Mr. Jones knew that his lies would damage Neil's reputation. He knew that. He knew that if he cast Neil and his family into the middle of this Sandy Hook lie, that millions of people across this country were going to believe it, that they were going to harass these people, that their lives are going to get more difficult. Not because of what was going on in their minds, but what was going on in the minds of the millions of people who saw this. He knew that damage would happen. He doesn't care. Thinks it's worth $1. What I want you to remember about this is this number. 24%. You are going to hear expert testimony in this case. That will tell you that that number, 24%, at the time all these events were happening, is the percent of people in this country who believe that Sandy Hook was either definitely or possibly staged. 1 in 4 Americans. And you're going to hear expert testimony that Mr. Jones was the only voice of any importance whatsoever, the only commercial media figure at all to spread these lies. That these were things that were confined to the weird corners of the internet, bizarre Facebook groups and weird little YouTube videos and these crank professors writing their anonymous blogs. Nobody with millions and millions and millions of followers. And nobody was doing it. It was Mr. Jones. And you're going to hear expert testimony that Mr. Jones and his conduct is the nearly exclusive driver of this. That as Mr. Jones put that out and his followers put that out, and it spread like a virus through the internet. And you're going to hear how, had it not been for Mr. Jones, this number would be trivial. Because it would have never gone beyond the most crazy places on the internet. And you're going to hear how for 10 years, Mr. Jones's lies have inspired his guests to harass Neil and Scarlett. That's something you're going to hear. You're going to hear how guests and viewers who believed Mr. Jones' lies contacted Neil and Scarlett at home. That they accosted them in public. They harassed them online and by telephone. And that they threatened their very lives. Mr. Jones knew that his lies about Jesse's death would cause severe emotional distress to Neil and Scarlett. He didn't just knew it, he intended it. Intended to inflict emotional distress. This was his goal. It wasn't that he committed an accident. It wasn't that he was just not careful. He intended to hurt them and now he wants to pay $1. But for 10 years, Mr. Jones has robbed Neil and Scarlett of the time they needed to heal over the violent death of their son Jesse, because Mr. Jones wanted to sell more of his products. That's the reality. You're going to hear how Mr. Jones's lies caused Neil and Scarlett to get stuck in loops of negative thinking about Jesse's death. Right? And what we mean by this is when your thoughts don't have an off switch. You're going to hear expert psychological testimony, medical testimony from medical experts, that what this is called is forced rumination. Rumination is obsessive thinking about a tragic situation when it interferes with your normal function. And that's what was happening to Neil and Scarlett over the past 10 years. For 10 years, Jones has used his campaign of lies about the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting to force Neil and Scarlett to ruminate about the violent loss of their son Jesse. Whenever Neil encounters the Sandy Hook lie, he can think of nothing else. And whenever Scarlett encounters the Sandy Hook lie, she shuts down and isolates. It didn't have to be this way. I want to make crystal clear to all of you. We are not here today to seek compensation for the death of their child and the grief that comes along with losing a child. A lot of parents lose children. Way more than we want. It's accidents, disease, firearms. We've actually gotten to the point where firearms is a leading cause of death of children. Parents have to deal with this. And yes, it's horrible. But with qualified medical intervention and time, you can heal. You don't get better. You just heal. You develop scar tissue. You come to a place of closure. You come to a place of acceptance. And the grief will always be with you. But if you can do it in a healthy way, the outcomes for a parent who's lost a child you're going to hear are okay. You can get them to be in an okay place. People like Neil and Scarlett can heal over time if they are allowed to shape their past and present circumstances. But Neil and Scarlett were prevented from healing because they had to contend with Alex Jones' lies. Dealing with this conspiracy of lies for 10 years put a lot of life stressors on Neil and Scarlett, which led to a substantial decline in their well-being and caused them to continually suffer aggravated mental anguish. That is what you will hear from a medical professional, psychological professionals. I'm going to tell you this. And that's one of the other things you're going to compensate for in this case. We talked a lot about mental anguish yesterday, but it's that and the reputation, right? It's about what went on in their minds. That's the mental anguish. But in the millions of other people's minds, that's the reputation damage. Both of those things happened to Neil and Scarlett. That's not the only thing you're going to have to consider. You're going to hear evidence over the next coming days that relates to the things you'll need to consider for punitive damages. And as we talked about, these are the damages designed to punish the defendant and also to deter, to convince every other media organization that if they go down this path, if they try to copy Mr. Jones's formula, it will not be a good thing for them. Hopefully, this trial will be able to deter and prevent any other media organizations from following the same cruel path. Because what you have to remember is that Mr. Jones, for 10 years, intentionally lied that the shooting was fake or a government-led plot. When I say 10 years, it's because I want you to understand this hasn't stopped. Bringing this lawsuit did not solve this. You can look at what Mr. Jones has said afterwards, and you can see inside of his mind and know how malicious he was, because he is still saying Sandy Hook is synthetic. I want to show you a video from October 1st, 2021, just last year, in which Mr. Jones says that, you know what? My original instinct was right. You know, at first I thought it was fake, then I thought maybe it's real, and now, he says, seeing how fake and synthetic everything is, maybe I was right. Maybe Alex Jones is always right. That's what you're about to hear him say. I want to show you this video from October 1st, 2021.
Just like the New York Times lying about WMDs on purpose and all the evil things that, oh, but I questioned one of the big events they hyped up because of a lot of the anomalies, and I have a right to question that. In fact, I, for a while, thought it didn't happen, then I thought it probably did, and now, seeing how synthetic everything is, maybe my original instinct, maybe Alex Jones is always. I'm pretty much right 99% of the time, folks, and so are you. I mean, we all know this is easy to look at to see what's happening.
And you've seen it here today. Mr. Jones still nodding along. Mr. Jones, you'll hear, he still thinks. It's cover-up. Sandy Hook. Keeps pushing it because it's important that his audience not hear him retract. It's important that if he was to go out and say, yeah, I was wrong. Yeah, I need to be accountable. That will destroy him with his audience. He can't do it. He won't do it. You need to understand that he intentionally lied to sell supplements. That's what he did. Mr. Jones used Jesse's death to sell his products. That is the reality. And Mr. Jones retaliated against Neil for speaking out. Mr. Jones told the world that Neil was lying about holding Jesse's body. Because Mr. Jones will do or say anything to protect his ability to profit off his lies. This is a case about creating change. You have the power to stop this from ever happening again. You can put an end to these lies by punishing Alex Jones. You can make that part of Jesse's legacy. You can make Jesse's legacy this trial, in which he can hopefully, Jesse's legacy, can prevent this from ever happening to another family, to another set of victims. That can be Jesse's legacy. But just as importantly is compensating Neil and Scarlett for the harm that they suffered. And I remember when we were talking in jury selection, when my partner, Mr. Ball, was talking to me. A lot of us were talking about how it's difficult to wrap your mind around something abstract, like mental anguish, reputation damages. And I know one of the things you're going to find out, that's why we all are for. We're going to tell you everything we can. We're going to give you all the instructions we can. We're going to show you all the evidence. But it's going to be up to you. And one of the ways that I think, right now, obviously I'm just an opening statement. I can't show you everything. But one of the things I think you should think about, a number you should keep in mind, something to help wrap your head around this level of damage, is this number, that 24%. The number of people in this country who believe that Sandy Hook was definitely or possibly staged. This pool of people who do not believe Neil and Scarlett, these pool of people who doubt them, from out of which come these followers who harass them. That group of people is 75 million people. And we would submit to you that a fair measure, analysis of the level of harm that was done to Neil's reputation out of all of this is $1 for every one of those people. Just $1. 75 million. And we would submit to you, too, that the emotional damage that was done to Neil and Scarlett, which you will hear through medical experts, we'd submit to you that that is at least as valuable as what happened to their reputation. At least. In this case, that has never had anything like this ever happen before. Another 75 million. And that is why, at the end of evidence, we're going to come and we're going to ask you for a verdict of $150 million. Now that is a huge verdict, to be sure. But it is one that will do justice to the level of harm done in this case. harm that was done to the grieving parents of murdered children, who have had to endure for 10 years the most despicable and vile campaign of defamation and slander in American history. We look forward to telling you their story. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bankston. We are going to take our morning break. It is 10:50. We're going to break for 20 minutes. For my jury, remember all of my instructions. This is still a no discussion time. So you can go out through that door as soon as Ms. Mashik-Steele comes in, and be ready to come back at 11:10. Thank you.
All right. All right.
And just whoever is last, make sure you shut that door behind you, please. Thank you.
I don't know if they need that.
All right, you may be seated. Yes, Mr. Reynolds?
At this time, the defense would move for a mistrial based on a violation of the Civil Practice and Remedies Code, Chapter 31.0011. Mr. Bankston's opening statement squarely put before the jury content that the Civil Practice and Remedies Code that the Texas legislature says should not be in an opening statement in the first part of a bifurcated trial, and therefore we'd ask for a mistrial.
All right, well, this is not, as we have discussed at length, a traditional bifurcated trial. The only element, the only issue, and the only type of evidence that is bifurcated is the evidence on Mr. Jones and Free Speech Systems' net worth, which was not discussed in the opening statement. The motion is denied.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that we need to take up a quick thing about a board here.
That's fine. If I stand up, everybody stands up.
Thank you.
All right, you may proceed.
May it please the court.
Yes.
We heard a lot about rules at the beginning of the personal injury lawyer's presentation. I'm going to tell you the most important rule I learned as a young lawyer. In case anybody can't read my handwriting, that says do not lie to the jury if you hope to get the verdict that you've requested. What we heard was a conspiracy of lies. The truth is going to come from that witness stand. It's going to be in the documents, the records, the evidence. My mentor, who I'm lucky enough to have sitting at this table with me, told me a long time ago to keep track of the other side's opening statement and write down their misrepresentations so you can come back to the jury in closing argument and show them where they haven't kept their word. You see, a lawyer's opening statement is not like a politician's speech. You don't get to see if the politician is going to keep her word before you vote for her. You get to see if we keep our word before you vote in this case. My name is Andino Reynal, and I am honored to represent Alex Jones and FSS. He is one of the most polarizing figures in this nation. And I'm honored to represent him, not because I agree with everything that he says, but because I believe in his right to say, and I believe in every American's right to choose what they watch and what they listen to and what they believe. Mr. Bankston's first lie came at 9:37 a.m. when he said that Infowars was one of the most significant networks in the USA. In fact, the evidence will show that in 2018, Infowars was completely deplatformed. You will not find Infowars on YouTube. You will not find Infowars on Facebook. You will not find Infowars on Twitter. You will find it absolutely nowhere. Mr. Jones has been canceled, punished for statements that are related to this case. Statements we don't dispute were wrong. But in order to render a just verdict, you need to understand and be able to see all the evidence and understand the chain of events and understand what he said and when he said it. I'm going to take my time, and I promise not to go on for too long. To first tell you a little bit about this case, go through a timeline of events, and then lay out why we believe the evidence will show that we should receive your verdict. On December 14th, 2012, Adam Lanza, a mentally disturbed young man in Connecticut, woke up early. He got a .22 caliber bolt-action rifle, went to his mother's room, and shot her in the head while she was sleeping. He then armed himself with a long gun and 2 pistols, and some reports say he drove by the high school where he'd been a student, saw 2 police cars, and diverted to the elementary school. He shot his way in and killed 20 first graders, 6-year-olds, and 6 school employees. In the span of 10 minutes, he created pain that would last a lifetime. Alex Jones was 1,500 miles away in Austin, Texas, dropping off his own 6-year-old at school. When he heard about the event, he was shocked and saddened, just like everyone else in America. He was also suspicious. Alex Jones has hosted a show called Infowars since the late 1990s. He started out on Austin Public Access. Infowars is a talk show where Alex Jones discusses, and some of the people who work with him, discuss conspiracy theories. And they discuss government cover-ups. And they discuss lies told by the mainstream media. And they try to give an alternative view. Mostly it's a college. So let's discuss what happened and go through the years. I want to clarify something. Because you're going to watch the videos. The videos are the most important part of this. Not cherry picking little snippets, but actually watching the videos. And I hope you hold the plaintiffs accountable. You're going to hear that Alex Jones was concerned about the government's response on the day of Sandy Hook. You're going to hear that he suspected the government, that he thought the government might have been involved. You are not going to hear him say that he didn't think any kids were killed at any time in 2012 or 2013, okay? So when you watch those videos, and watch them, when he says staged an attack, he means they committed an attack, okay? When he says false flag, he means the government attacked its own citizens to try and achieve a political end. Alex Jones doesn't trust the government. Millions of Americans don't trust the government. So let's talk about 2012. And the first thing I want to talk about is what happened in the immediate aftermath of the Sandy Hook murders. There was, and you'll see Alex, you'll be able to watch his response to it. Like him, everyone was heartbroken across the nation and across the world. And they showed their sympathy for the people of Newtown, Connecticut. You will hear from the witness stand, there were over 500,000 letters, cards, drawings. There were so many toys sent to the town because it had happened right around Christmas. So many toys sent around the town that they had to get a separate mail sorting facility to distribute the toys to other places. Millions of dollars went to the United Way to support the family members. President Obama got on a jet and flew there the next day. I mean, not to mention every senator from Connecticut, every mayor, every town politician, people from around the world gathered to mourn. The mainstream media also went. Unfortunately, mainstream media. Some of the people who went to Sandy Hook, and the evidence is going to show that Sandy Hook wasn't different from any other school shooting. I mean, we live in a nation divided. If you're blue, every time there's a school shooting, it's America's the most dangerous place in the world, and we need to ban the AR-15. And if you're red, every time there's a school shooting, it's, again, here they are, taking advantage of a tragedy to try and infringe upon our rights. Unfortunately, that's just the way things work in this country. And it was no different at Sandy Hook. Hours after the event, CNN, every major news source was there, interviewing people, broadcasting. The evidence is going to show calling for gun legislation. Infowars, back in Austin, was also covering it in 2012 and 2013. It was big news. And Infowars never contested that the children were murdered in 2012 or 2013. You'll watch the videos. I was surprised. I don't have them ready to play. You'll watch them, okay? Assess them yourself. They were covering it, and they were saying that it was being botched, mishandled, and used to push gun legislation. And you'll hear from the witness stand, they will admit to you that the investigation and the coverage of the event was botched at first. I mean, I don't know what we have now. There's an enormous report. But you will hear covered that CNN misidentified the shooter and put this man's picture up from Hoboken, New Jersey for 4 hours and said that he was the real killer. You will hear that there was another, well, at least they reported that there was another man in handcuffs outside. You will hear that it was reported, and you'll see it in the video, that there were people who were arrested. There was chaos. And we all know that that's what happens after these events, okay? Unfortunately, in this case, the chaos, the bad coverage, led a lot of people to doubt. People who became known as truthers or the truth community. These were hundreds or even thousands of Americans who got together on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube and discussed the event and pointed out what they saw as inconsistencies in it, that they believed suggested that there was a cover-up, that the government wasn't being forthright about what had happened, okay? And some of these people are very, very extreme. Okay? They are. I want to mention 4 people in particular because they were leading members of the truth community. All right? They were all over YouTube. And you'll hear that some of the videos they made got 10 million views. This was big news. And Infowars was covering the questions that people have. Because Infowars believes in people's right to question information. And they were interviewing these people and saying, hey, you have questions about Sandy Hook. What are they? Okay? Now there did come a time when Alex was taken in, right? And did become, for a time, one of those people. We're not hiding that. But it wasn't in 2012, and it wasn't in 2013. The 4 people are Dr. James Fetzer, who was a professor at the University of Minnesota at the time, Dr. James Tracy, who was a professor at Atlantic Florida University of Media Studies at the time, Wolfgang Halbert, who you'll see, who was a Florida state trooper, who did work for the Seminole County Education Board, and who claimed to be a school safety expert, who had been interviewed on multiple channels and had even testified before Congress. Some of that now, 2020 hindsight, I don't think is true. Okay, but he presented himself that way at the time. And if you understand the news cycle and how it works, commentators, people on talk shows, they get information, they run with it. Alex Jones was wrong to believe these people. But he didn't do it out of spite. The evidence will show that he did it because he believed it, because he thought it was important coverage, because he thought that these people had a right to say what they were doing, that a citizen has a right to get on Infowars and talk about what their questions are. So let's talk about the bad facts. I mean, we talked about brutal honesty. 2014 to 2015 in the summer for the rest of this. Alex Jones has apologized repeatedly for the coverage that he gave to Sandy Hook from 2014 to the summer of 2015. And he has every reason. He does. They trusted people that they shouldn't have trusted. It created a lot of tension at his company. There were arguments about it. But he felt the show was important, and he aired it. He regrets that now, and he said so. The thing you have to remember about Alex is that he has been talking about conspiracy theories and taking on the elites, whether that is the Bush administration or the Obama administration or the Clinton administration. He's been the outsider for a really long time. And by the time we get to 2014 and 2015, he felt he had seen what he perceived as so many lies and so many cover-ups and so much hand-washing of the facts that he had become biased. He was looking at the world through dirty glasses. And if you look at the world through dirty glasses, everything you see is dirty. Important for you to know, I don't think there's any evidence that is going to come from that witness stand that Mr. Heslin or Miss Lewis ever watched this show during this period. And I can assure you that there will be no evidence that Mr. Jones or any member of his staff named Mr. Heslin or Miss Lewis during this time. Okay? So just to recap where we are, 2012, 2013, Infowars is covering Sandy Hook with a slant that children were really murdered, but there's a government cover-up and potentially government involvement. That doesn't say that Mr. Heslin and Miss Lewis aren't the parents of a dead child. It doesn't. So we get to this period, and it ends in July. And after July, we have quiet from Infowars on this topic.
I'll reject the reasons you just discussed with the motion to claim that Infowars was quiet until whenever that's...
I'm free to discuss what I believe the evidence will show, Your Honor.
You are free to discuss what the evidence will show, but liability has been established in this case, and you are close to the edge on that. So please be more careful.
Let's talk about 2016. It was an election year. It was a very contested election. And Mr. Jones, for the first time in his entire career, supported a candidate. And he was associated with Donald Trump. Hillary saw that as a liability for Trump and made Alex a big part of her campaign, saying that Alex had repeatedly said on his show that Sandy Hook hadn't happened. By this point, Alex didn't believe that. So on November 18th, 2016, he put out a video called Final Statement on Sandy Hook. And you'll have the opportunity to watch that video. And I think you should insist on watching that video in its totality, just like every video that's going to come into evidence. Because only then can you understand what really happened. You can't cherry pick. And he said, I want to reach out to the victims of criminal crimes and listeners to clarify where I stand on Sandy Hook. The last 3 or 4 years, the mainstream media has made attacks against me that I said no one died. I've hosted debates with both sides of the aisles. I've always said I'm not really sure of what happened. I can see based on the evidence why people might say nobody died, but I don't know what happened. I know mass shootings happen. The official story, however, of Sandy Hook has more holes in it than Swiss cheese. And he still believes that. That's it. Only statement on Sandy Hook for the whole year. Megyn Kelly's no friend to Donald Trump. And she decided that she was going to run a hit piece on Alex Jones about this issue. Alex Jones hadn't brought it up since November. She brought it up. She decided to air a show where she would confront Alex, who she got to interview by misrepresenting the purpose of the story, and juxtapose it with an interview with Mr. Heslin. Alex had never said Mr. Heslin's name. He'd never said Miss Lewis's name. The show is about to air. And before it airs, Alex says, I need to clear the air because this is going to misrepresent me. And he says, in a piece, I believe children died there. So the show airs, and afterwards, a young reporter at Infowars sees an article on a website called Zero Hedge. And that article is in evidence. And the judge has already found Infowars, or Free Speech Systems, parent company for Infowars, and Alex Jones guilty for those statements. But you are free to consider the intent with which they were made in determining whether they were made maliciously or in good faith. And you're going to hear from the reporter who made the statements.
Your Honor, I'm going to have to object again to the content.
So you're going to have to explain the difference between defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, for which Alex Jones and Free Speech Systems, LLC, have already been found liable, includes the state of mind of the actor. which means it has already been established that the acts they took to inflict the emotional distress were intentional. Defamation does not include that in the same way. So you're going to have to clarify that if you're going to go down that path.
I think the court has already clarified. Let me see. This is the article. It's in evidence. I'm going to move this because I'm sure that most of you can't see it. And basically, the article, you'll have it, you can read it, you can fact check me. But basically the article says that Megyn Kelly isn't doing a good job fact checking her sources because she didn't run down a seeming inconsistency between what the coroner said about the parents not being brought into contact with the bodies on the day of the shooting and what Mr. Heslin said about holding his child on the day of the shooting. And interestingly, it states Alex Jones' official position is that he believes children died in the shooting. In fact, during a 2014 account of a hearing before the Newtown Board of Education, an Infowars journalist did not dispute that Adam Lanza had perpetrated the shooting. I'm almost. There are 4 big reasons why I'm going to come back to you at the end of this case and ask for your verdict. The first reason is because when you look at the totality of the coverage, the evidence will be that Infowars' coverage of the Sandy Hook incident between 2012 and 2018 was less than 0.5% of its total coverage. It was barely 27 hours.
If I can object again, this entire department.
He can say this. He's got to show it.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Less than 1/2. And remember rule number 1, the lawyer who lies deserves to lose. Okay? Less than 0.5% of total coverage on the show. Okay. And important to add to that is, remember, you got CNN and Fox and every other newscast covering this issue, right? Especially back in 2013. And Infowars is a whisper in a hurricane. Point number 2. The no one died at Sandy Hook lie did not begin with Mr. Jones. It began with Fetzer and Tracy and Halbert and a guy named Steve Pachenik, who was a former State Department official and a psychiatrist. They were 4 of the most prominent among thousands of people who were saying this on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. Given that, it brings me to point number 3. You are still allowed to decide how much damage Alex Jones caused. And in doing so, you can assess whether his words made their way to the ears of the plaintiffs. You can assess whether anybody was moved to act by anything that Alex Jones said. And the evidence will show that he did not cause the harassment. Number 4, Mr. Bankston, the personal injury lawyer, talked about this a little bit. Actual damages. The first question you're going to be asked to answer is actual damages. You will see no evidence that it was Alex Jones, the talk show host, and not Adam Lanza, the mass murderer, that caused the mental anguish that is honestly suffered by Mr. Heslin and Ms. Lewis. The videos are so important. Watch. Before I sit down, I want to make a couple more points. Number 1, Alex Jones has apologized repeatedly for what he said. And I expect he'll do so again here. Alex Jones has already been punished. Because of this case, he lost all his access to the internet. Millions of dollars. Canceled. He regrets what he did. And he's paying a price for it. He's paying a price for it today. He pays a price for it every time somebody on the street chases him and says, "You killed the children at Sandy Hook," and throws coffee on him. And because he's been canceled, nobody can hear his side of the story. Nobody can see the texture of reality. We are not cardboard cutouts. We are all real, complex people. People make mistakes. They pay for it. They want to tell you this is the great Satan. This man is not a cardboard cutout. He's a human being just like every one of us with his own ideas. You will be able to decide. And I want you to ask yourself at the end of this case, is this an honest attempt by personal injury lawyers to get just compensation for damages that were actually experienced? Or is this a cynical attempt by personal injury lawyers to enrich themselves while silencing a political opponent and limiting every American's right to choose what they watch and what they listen to? I look forward to presenting this case to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reynal. Before we break, I see people with gum in their mouth. It's clearly stated on the door, there is no eating, there is no gum in this courtroom. If I see it again, I'll stop. I'm talking, sir. The number one rule in court, fair or not, is when the judge is talking, nobody else is. Even if I interrupt someone. There is no chewing gum. There is no soda. There is no eating in this courtroom. If I see it again, I'll have you removed. There is no recording of any kind of the YouTube feed or the proceedings in this courtroom without prior written permission signed by me. No photographs, no audio recording, no video recording. So I'm not taking away everyone's phones in the room, but if we find out that you're doing one of those things, you will be removed. There is no talking in front of, or approaching by anyone of my jury. If somebody does that in the courthouse, they will be removed until this trial is over. Just want to make that very clear to everyone. We're going to break for lunch. It's noon. We're going to break until 1:30. My jury can go ahead and head on out. The lawyers need me right now.
It doesn't matter when, but